Hey, it's Thavin Sedvik with the Catch today, and we're going to be going over where to sight in your big game hunting rifle at what yardages specifically. So, in case you don't know, I have quite a bit of success when it comes to Western big game hunting. I filled 13 of 15 of my big game tags, so I do have just a little bit of experience and even a couple of failures in there to give you some real life experience on in order to show you exactly what mistakes I've made, what mistakes I see other people make, so that way you can have a better odds of success. Okay, with that being said, I'm going to go over a really extreme example, and you might be very close to believing some of the criteria in this example, or you might already have some very realistic expectations. It doesn't matter because by the end of the video, we're all going to be on the same page and we're all going to be shooting a lot more successfully. Okay, so an example I see all the time is that at 500 yards, that's where I want to sight in my rifle. So I get my brother-in-law, he sights in my rifle for 500 yards. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to start asking people in the Nevada Hunt Forum where to hunt for mule deer. And they got really great intentions. They know that in Nevada, you're going to be hunting in mountainous terrain, in wide open spaces, in a desert, where there's some times where you can see for pretty much a mile away, maybe even 2 miles with the right kind of spotting scope. But the problem with that is, how do you know that you're going to see game exactly at 500 yards, right? What if the game is at 550 yards or 450 yards? You're going to miss either way if your gun's sighted in exactly for 500 yards. So that might not be a great strategy. But the problem is where are you going to test that, right? If you don't live in Nevada, if you don't live in mountainous terrain, how are you going to actually test your rifle to make sure that your rifle performs shooting on a hill, shooting in windy conditions, in wind that you're not used to, in wind where it might blow one direction at your face, but another direction downwind, down towards the target? How do you know, right? How do you know where your bullet's going to be? Well, yes, you can use a ballistic calculator, but without testing it, you just don't know. Okay, so that's another problem, is shooting at ranges that you have not tested your rifle at, which you should not be doing. Okay, the third problem with this is the shooter's ability. Okay, very few shooters are actually in the top 1% of world-class shooters who can effectively take game at 300 yards and more. Okay, what that means, in my personal experience and opinion, is it would behoove you to get better at stalking game and learning how to get closer to game, right, into that 200-yard range to increase your odds of success. Most people are not spooking game at 200 yards and missing shot opportunities. Most people are shooting at game at 300 yards or more and missing opportunities that they would have never spooked away had they just tried to sneak in closer. So, how do I hunt? What I do is I find a tall hill. I glass from that hill. I find multiple animals. And then from that data, right, from those multiple animals, I find the most reasonable one where I feel I have the best advantage in order to sneak in close on. I sneak in close, typically within 100 yards. That's my typical shooting range, is 100 yards and less. And then I kill that big game animal. It's really that simple. It's not super complicated. So, in my sighting and criteria, okay, I have to be able to shoot quick shots at 100 yards and less. I also need to be able to shoot at reasonable distances of maybe up to 200 yards in the perfect conditions. And I also, if I'm a really extreme shooter, I'll go into how to sight in if you really are one of those world-class shooters who can shoot 400 yards or more, but you just don't have experience shooting out in Nevada, and how you should set up your rifle. Okay, so with that being said, is in an iron sight weapon, like for example a lever action 30-30 or a 45-70, right, government, these bullets are going pretty slow. They carry plenty of energy to kill a deer at reasonable shooting distances, but they're going to have a lot of drop, okay? So you don't really need to be shooting these bullets much beyond 150 yards. And a matter of fact, your eye is going to have a very hard time picking up an animal at beyond 150 yards anyway. So if you sight it in for 50 yards or even 100 yards, you're going to be totally fine for hunting with an iron sight. And I have killed game with an iron sight at 40 yards. uh, big game. I shot a doe out here on a youth hunt where, this was back in the day where you used to be able to take does on youth hunts, and I did take a doe with a muzzleloader with iron sights at 40 yards. Something you can definitely do. Now, if you've got a rifle and you really like 100 yard zero, 100 yard zero works great. Okay, so don't be afraid to use 100 yard zero, but you can also use a 200 yard zero, or what some people would call maximum point blank range. You're essentially doing what I would say is about the same thing, but by using that longer zero, you're committing to not going beyond where you practiced. Meaning, if you zero the gun for 200 yards and you know that you tested at 220 yards and it does not fall too far below the point of impact where you'd be missing the game, then your maximum range is 220 yards. But that also means you have to test at increments, for example, at 150 yards and 100 yards to make sure that the gun isn't shooting over your line of sight to where the point where you could accidentally shoot over the game animals or shoot above where you expect, where you're no longer hitting the vitals. So you actually have to test where you're shooting at a range. And if you don't have access to a range where you can test the entire distance, then this is not an appropriate sighted method for you. I see too many people using a ballistics calculator where it says, oh, if you're 3/4 of an inch high at 50 yards, then you're going to be on at 200 yards. That is not what I'm talking about, okay? There is a lot of mistake that can happen. If you're just even a 1/16 of an inch off at 50 yards, okay, you're going to be well over a 1/2 inch off at 200 yards. And a 1/16 of an inch is going to be very difficult to notice when you're shooting a 30 caliber rifle, okay? The caliber of your rifle is going to well overcome a 1/16 of an inch difference in zero, right? So let's just say you're off by 1/4 of an inch, right? You're going to be off by well over an inch by the time 200 yards comes up, and you're shooting typically about 4 times worse in the field as you are at the range. So understand that there's nothing wrong with hunting in close, okay? So if you really don't have access to a range that's that far away, just stick to your maximum shot being whatever the maximum range you practice at. So nothing wrong with 100 yard zero in this case. There's plenty of gun ranges that have 100 yards. So what do I recommend for those people who are shooting at extreme ranges? I still recommend 100 yard zero. And what I recommend is learning how to dial your turrets using ballistic calculators and testing in the field. Now, it might sound like I just trashed on ballistics calculators earlier in this video. And I don't believe in ballistic calculators alone. We should not build blind faith on our cell phones and expect our cell phone to know where a bullet's going to hit at 400 yards away with unknown wind and different temperatures, different atmospheric conditions, okay? And believing that it's going to kill a big game animal every single time, okay? That's not what I believe. But what I do believe in is using your cell phone as a tool, using a ballistic calculator and verifying it with actual real range data, okay? And seeing if your tool on your phone, if your calculator is actually lining up and leading you to hit targets at range. And so if that's something that you're doing, you're probably getting very, very close to being that top 10%, top 5%, maybe even one day top 1% shooter that really can hit game at 400 or 500 yards. But I would say a very small percentage of hunters are capable of effectively hitting game at 300 yards and more. And a lot of those hunters still sighted for 100 yards. So what is the best zero overall? I believe the best zero is still 100 yard zero, okay? Can't change my mind on it. I would absolutely recommend you shoot your zero at 100 yards, but there's nothing wrong with changing it. If you want to do it a little bit differently, if you want to do maximum point blank range, if you want to dial and you want to dial starting from 200 yards, be my guest. But if you're going to start dialing from 500 yards, I think your head's a little bit out there, and I would ask, how many big game animals have you killed in Nevada? If you've killed a lot and that's how you do it, then good for you. But I'd say very few people are in your territory. Okay, most people are going to be more successful if they're stalking into 200 yards than if they're trying to practice out to 400. Thank you for watching. If you got any questions, please comment down below, and we'll see you guys next time.